Welcome to the No Plateau Podcast for stroke and brain injury survivors, their caregivers, and the therapists helping them to break boundaries in their recovery journey. Hosted by Henry Hoffman, a certified occupational and clinical therapist, and Pete Duran, a certified podcast host, CPH. Look it up. This podcast is intended to supplement stroke and brain injury survivors' recovery journey. Therefore, all content affiliated with this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the No Plateau Podcast. I'm solo today. Our co-host Henry Hoffman is under the weather, but I'm honored to be joined by Chris and Austin and hoping that you guys can share some of your story with our audience. I think this is a unique unique story. I met Chris and Austin Harrell at the Believe Stroke event where they both spoke to the audience. And frankly, I was moved by the story, moved by the success Austin has shown since his stroke and what he's doing today. And I thought it would be great for us to share their story with the audience because I think it's a unique perspective of a stroke survivor as well as a caregiver in their story. And I think some of the research, Chris, you did was really compelling. And I think some of the findings you found would be great for our audience. So welcome to the program, gentlemen.
Thank you. We're glad to be here.
Chris, I'm gonna kick it over to you first and have you kind of share what Austin experienced and how you guys got through that, and definitely touch on the Liberty aspect. My son plays soccer. We've talked about this. One played at NC State. One plays at Elon. So I watched my son play soccer at Liberty, Austin, and you went to school there. It's a fantastic place. So I want to understand a little bit more about that as we get into the story. So Chris, I'll turn it over to you.
It was a typical July day here in North Carolina. I work from home and have been doing so for the last 20 some odd years. But I went into the kitchen to see what I was going to have for lunch and looked outside, saw Austin out in the backyard juggling and doing things initially. I looked back up shortly after I figured out what I was going to eat and saw him holding his head with his hand. And I thought that looks kind of odd. So I went out and I said, "Hey, Austin, what's going on?" And he says, "Dad, I have a really bad headache." And I said, "Well, did you fall and hit your head?" And he goes, "No." And I said, "Well, you think you're going to be all right?" And he goes, "Yeah, I think so." Walked back into the house, went back to the window, looked out again. Well, he was gone. And I went back to the door to go back outside to see what was going on and see where he was. And he was right there, met me at the door. But when I opened up the door, he looked right through me like I wasn't even standing there. And I knew that, I said, "Hey, buddy, what's going on?" And he just looked at me. And I opened up the door, let him walk on in. He put his hands on our kitchen island. And I could tell that he was there, but he wasn't responding to me at all. He was sweating. I kept saying, "Hey, what's going on?" And no response. And he was standing there kind of starting to lose his balance. And I was like, "Wow, what's going on?" And I sat him down in a chair. It was real close to the island there. And I saw his arm drop down, his right arm drop down to his side. And he used his left arm to pick it up and put it back in his lap. Still no response from him. He was not responding to any questions. He wasn't even looking at me. And even if he did look at me, it was like I wasn't there. It was like he was looking through me. Something was going on in his head that was so intense that he just could not articulate any response whatsoever. That's kind of where things started. As soon as I saw him drop his arm and pick it up and put it back in his lap, and the fact that he wasn't responding, I'm like, this is serious. I need to call 911. And that's what I did. And tried to explain to them what I was at least observing. And, they dispatched pretty quickly. We have a EMT site not too far from our home. And they got here very quickly, which was great, but he had not changed at all by the time they got here, walked him inside. They started talking to him. He would not respond to them. And they just started taking vitals and things like that, did an EKG on him. And they started asking me questions just like, what had he been doing beforehand? And I kind of told him he had been outside, playing soccer and working out. And that was about it. But they didn't indicate any potential stroke at that point in time. They were just concerned because of his inability to express himself, not responding to them. I think his heart rate was up. I think the EKG was irregular, but it wasn't telltale as far as what was really going on. So they whisked him off. My wife met us going out the door, basically, as the EMTs were here and taking him out. And so she just hopped right into the ambulance and went off with him. We didn't really get to talk much. I had called her to tell her in between after having called the EMTs that Austin's not doing good. I had to call the EMTs. And so there was no real conversation between us.
At what point, Chris, did a stroke cross your mind at this point?
Well, yeah, I guess the first thing is being an athlete. Both Austin and I were athletes. I played college soccer. He'd been playing college. Was hoping to play at Liberty and had been playing all his life. So, we had been under, physical heat duress before, obviously, but this obviously looked like something well beyond that. I think I had maybe heat stroke in my early days when I was playing. And so I kind of knew what that kind of looked like and felt like. But what he was demonstrating it was beyond that. But I was just kind of, I guess, hopeful as a parent, maybe this is just a really crazy reaction to heat stroke.
Sure.
That's, of course, what I was thinking as I was driving to the hospital after they had whisked him off in the ambulance and, walking into the ER room, find him in a room, and Susan was in there with him, and he's still not responding. So, yeah.
Two things. As a former college athlete, a parent of a couple, D1 soccer players, I was traveling with my son's academy team in Florida, and one of their best players suffered heat stroke.
Oh, wow.
And it was very difficult to see. He kind of, same thing. He had similar reactions, fell over, lost the ability to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when they got him in the hospital, they pumped him full of 2 IV bags, and he was back to normal in minutes, right? It was, they kind of knew what happened. In fact, he wanted to play the next day. We're like, I'm sure Austin could relate to that feeling as well, too.
Yeah.
When you were sitting there and your dad's talking to you in the kitchen, were you aware kind of what's happening?
Well, I'm here. I'm alive to be back.
So, yeah, so the questions that he prepared for weren't quite like this. So he's having a harder time articulating that.
It was interesting as you described it. So let's pivot back to Austin for a second. Like you said, you're here.
Right.
You ended up graduating from school. How do you feel today versus how you felt, right when it happened?
I felt relief. I had just graduated from Liberty last May. I am so excited to be done. I could read out loud, to take classes to Liberty.
Chris, why don't you share what Austin had to do to get through school? Because I think that's really important. And by the way, maybe brief us on what Austin's condition was post-stroke and then kind of where he went today and then how he got through school.
Yeah, so immediately after his stroke, he was, like I said, not able to respond at all. But shortly after he got to the hospital, we started to learn, I guess, the gravity of what was really going on with him. He was not able to move his right side really at all. Wasn't able to stand up, wasn't able to walk, obviously, had no real stability whatsoever. We were not aware initially of the severity of his vision cut. He lost right peripheral vision in both eyes. That was pretty substantial from the standpoint of going forward to hopefully be able to be more independent and be able to drive someday. He lost that ability.
Sure.
The ability not to be able to speak, obviously, was a huge concern to us. We were not aware of what that was called initially. We later on found out that was called aphasia, and what that involved, the loss of his language, the loss of ability to understand what people were saying to him. Mm-hmm. For some people, it's the ability to even be able to read, to write. For Austin, he mainly lost his ability, obviously, to vocalize, express himself, and understanding what people are saying to him. His ability to read and to write was still kind of intact initially. So that gave us, some great hope, obviously. But initially, it seemed like he was not able to communicate to us at all. So that was troubling. When we went down to Atlanta was really where we began to have to grapple with what was really in front of him. At Duke, after the craniotomy, and they started trying to figure out whether or not he could swallow and eat foods, and whether or not he'd have to have a thickener in his liquids to be able to swallow and not have to worry about aspirating, which causes a whole host of problems. We were very blessed that he was able to eat.
Okay.
Aerated food initially, but he graduated up to regular food like you and I eat every day pretty quickly once we got down to Atlanta. We had to use a thickener in his fluids for probably about a month or two, I guess, after we got out of Duke, and we're involved in the inpatient down at Shepherd Center.
What was the impetus for going to the Shepherd Center, and how long was the transition between Duke and getting down to Atlanta?
4 months.
Well, yeah. Once Austin had, Austin had a stroke on July 22nd.
Okay.
And we headed down to Shepherd Center probably about 2.5 weeks after that. He had his craniotomy the second day after his stroke.
Okay.
we had to move around from hospitals. We went to initially a small community hospital. Within the first couple of hours, they realized his situation was way too big, but they had been the ones initially to identify the stroke. They did a CT, saw the stroke, recommended TPA, which they administered. We were kind of told by the doctor there that this would be something that would potentially, hopefully, stave off even increased brain damage potentially.
Okay.
We signed off on that, but it really didn't make any changes for him, unfortunately. But they moved him to Big Wake here in Raleigh, and even once we were there, he was only there maybe about 24 hours. They did more assessments on him, but his brain swelling became more increased. And when they started talking to us about what the on-call neurologist there was willing to do, or what his approach was for stroke victims, he did not believe in doing craniotomies. And so that, as a parent, that scared me. I was like, well, wait a minute, you're taking something off the table that could potentially, save my son's life or lessen the severity of the outcome. Because as a young man, he didn't have as much room in his brain and his skull to take on the 5 to 6 days of potential swelling that was going to go on. And so we knew that it was vital to have that in our back pocket. So as soon as I was told that by the neuro staff there at Wake, I said, we've got to, that's not going to work. And they started saying, we need to start considering university hospitals like Duke or UNC, because they'll do anything and everything. And so, they went out to find who had a bed open. Duke came back pretty quickly, and they life flighted him up to Duke.
Wow. And
so we had to then drive from Raleigh up to Durham. We actually had a good friend do that because we were frazzled at that point. I mean, I just couldn't even imagine driving, knowing that he just took off in a helicopter, having to watch him get intubated, which was very difficult to watch as a parent.
Yes, it is.
His airways were fine. It's just that they have to do that kind of thing when they take somebody on a life flight. And I actually saw him in fighting it because he was actually trying to fight them when they were doing that. His right arm came up to try to stop them from placing the air passage, into his.
Wow.
But seeing that and had not seen his right arm move that entire time, just it scares you. You see something like that, and you're just like, well, you knew he was frightful at that time.
Sure.
Because his brain was even able to do something at that moment that it wasn't able to do later on. But at any rate, we got up to Duke, and we expected to walk in and hopefully have a couple of possibilities of things that they might be able to do to address the brain swelling, because it had increased to the point where they were getting very concerned about it, even at Wake. They had tried to do an MRI on him, but he was not calm enough to even go into an MRI machine. He was just moving too much. And so they weren't even really to take this type of assessment that they probably really needed to see what was going on. But by the time we got to Duke, things had gotten much, much worse. The pressure on his brain stem had gotten to the point where they basically met us in a meeting room with a neuro doc telling us, your son's got 15 minutes to live. We need to do immediate craniotomy on him or he's going to die. So, that kind of takes the breath out of you as a parent to get told that. You went there expecting that maybe they'll try this, they'll try that, maybe his condition will start to improve, and here we were with an even, what seemed even greater risk of life at that point in time.
Yeah. Just listening to this, my stomach has been sinking for the last 20 minutes anyhow, trying to absorb this.
Yeah.
You obviously gave permission to do the craniotomy.
Yep.
What happened? What was the next 24 hours like? Obviously, touch and go. When did you start to find out that that it had worked and there was hope? What did that look like?
Yeah, I mean, it obviously took some time. Obviously, after a craniotomy, me as a parent, and I'm a graphic artist. I'm very visual, and the idea of walking into the recovery room to see my son after that surgery, I had a very hard time.
Yeah.
I really couldn't bring myself to do it. Initially, my wife went back with a couple of our friends. We had some really incredible support from our church and some really close friends. And they went back initially with my wife, and she came back and she said, Chris, he looks fine. And fortunately, the high school pastor was there, and he said, I'll go back with you, Chris. And so I had a hard time walking back there. It was a tough thing to do. But when I walked in there and saw him, he looked, I won't say angelic, but he looked like he was at peace, that he wasn't fighting like he was previously, because when he was at Wake the night before, he was up all night pulling IVs and stuff out. They had to, restrain his left hand because he'd gotten so strong with his left arm. He was just taking things out of him left and right.
Sure.
My wife had watched that all night long. The reality was, his brain had swelled so much, even after they had removed bone plate, that you couldn't even tell it was missing. You could only see the scar that was on his head, and the sutures, obviously, on his shaved head, which was hard seeing too. But it just showed you how quickly that brain had swelled, and that there really was nothing there.
You're at Duke. You got through a very big initial scare. What was the thought process for the next couple of weeks, and then when did the facility in Atlanta become something that you guys started to consider?
Once he got stabilized, and unfortunately too, when we got there, they were in transitioning of moving their ICU units actually to a whole new facility, brand new facility they had just built there at Duke, which was really quite a godsend, because their original ICU was very dark. It did not feel like a very uplifting place. Like there was going to be a transfer of recovery. There was no windows, no nothing. They moved us into a new wing, and there were windows, and it was an area where the family could actually stay with the patient much more easily than they could have at their previous ICU situation. I would say probably a week into it, they were starting to assess, what his capabilities were. They took him off the air assistance. He had, still had airway passage assistance, but he did not need that. That part of his brain was not damaged through the strokes. He was able to breathe on his own, which was a huge relief, because you start to think about having to have a trach put in and all that stuff.
Sure.
and all that. Pretty soon they started talking about rehab. They really only mentioned the Shepherd Center, to be honest with you. That's where they had sent the majority of their patients to, from spinal cord, all types of different TBI situations. And so, I had already myself started looking, because I knew that was the next phase. But I found a video there at the Shepherd Center on a football player that was Austin's age. He was 18 years old. He had just signed to play for Clemson, and he had a massive stroke.
Wow.
And he ended up there at the Shepherd Center, and they were a real strong Christian family, so that really spoke to us. And I saw that story, and I was like, I felt like that was just God saying, this is where you need to take Austin. And so I didn't really question them on that. I knew there were other places in the country. That was the closest area of, proximity for us.
Yeah.
But getting them there, it became a little bit of an issue too, because insurance was being a little bit of a problem. They were going to have to life flight him from RDU to Atlanta. He wasn't going to be able to be taken in an ambulance. So that's an expensive, situation.
Mm-hmm.
But things finally worked out with that, and he got life flighted down there. I would say it was probably about two and a half weeks after his stroke. We got him down there to be in inpatient care. But when he walked in the door down there, he was in a wheelchair. He still had not said any words.
Oh, wow. Okay. No speaking at that point. Yeah. Okay.
No speaking at all. And it really wasn't until we got down. I take that back. He did write us the word soccer. I have a photograph on my camera iPhone that he wrote some of the initial words. I think he wrote dad, he wrote soccer, might have been something else. But he was able to scribble that out with his left hand, mind you. He was right-handed beforehand, but was a great left-footed soccer player. I, kind of really impressed upon him. You need to be able to use both feet, So he was amphibious or ambidextrous, as
yep, absolutely.
That was an awesome thing for him. He even played tennis left-handed, but he batted right-handed.
Oh, my word.
This kind of things, when he was growing up, those kind of things he kind of did. So, hindsight, I guess, obviously it enabled him to transition into using his left hand as his predominant hand at that point in time.
So when you got to the facility in Atlanta, what was your first interaction with the staff there? How did that go?
Since they flew down, I got down there a number of hours after they got there, because I had to drive down from Cary. I had to take all kinds of stuff. They were great. They were there. They had a team. They basically assign you to a team of an OT, a PT, a speech pathologist,
mm-hmm.
and of course your care doctor and the nursing staff. So they pretty much met us that evening anyway, initially just to kind of introduce themselves, and then we got a full introduction to them the next day, and kind of finding out what was Austin going to have to do every day. They, even before they admitted him, they had to assess to make sure that he could handle 4 to 5 hours a day of intense therapy.
Sure.
And of course, as a dad, is he going to make the team, or are they going to pick him to take him down there? Because if they weren't, then what do you do?
Sure.
What are your options if the rehab facility won't take your child? And because of his age of being 18, that was a blessing from an insurance standpoint, because that was going to be pretty much all covered and taken care of. So it wasn't going to be putting back a huge amount of cost back on us, which is what usually happens a lot of times to adults. So that was a great blessing.
At what point did Austin start to respond to the treatment and then be able to interact with you guys, whether it's verbally or in writing? And when did you start to see that reaction?
Yeah, I mean, even at Duke, I mean, once he awoke and was basically taken off all, because they put him in a drug-induced coma initially after his surgery. So there was a period of time where he was out. They would bring him out every now and then. And I'll have to tell you, the first time he actually even responded to just a verbal, question, the ICU nurse was just trying to get him to give him the thumbs up, and he hadn't done that the first couple of times. And we had just come out of a meeting with the doctor telling us that, most likely your son's going to have to be institutionalized. I hope you guys understand that, because they were just trying. I think they thought we were being too. Even though I don't know, I didn't feel like I was necessarily being upbeat, but I think they thought we were being too positive, and they had to kind of set us down and say, hey, you guys need to understand the situation here. And I'm like, well, okay. I agree. Maybe that might be a possible outcome, but I also feel like that he could recover. And, but at any rate, we started to get smiles out of him. He was like looking and said, at least you felt like you recognized, because when someone can't communicate to you, you don't really know what they're thinking, what's going on inside. But so we were able to get that before we got down to Atlanta. They hit it hot and heavy the next day. As soon as they were ready to start therapy, they got into it, and they're starting to make assessments. And we were meeting with different folks there as well, then just kind of giving us more of the information what was going to be going on for him and his stay down there. But he started responding, relatively quickly. I mean, he was able to walk out of at 6 weeks, he was able to walk out of the Shepherd Center. And that was a huge, huge blessing.
It's amazing.
He was wearing a helmet. He had to wear a helmet the whole time because he was still missing that part of his skull. And in fact, he was without that until January of the next year. So several months he had to wear a helmet. We had to be careful, and he had to wear a gait belt, and so we had to at least kind of keep a hold of him just in case if he was to lose his balance or whatever. He had nothing protecting his brain other than that helmet.
Sure.
He responded pretty quickly with the walking, but the speech was a very, very, very slow burn thing, as well as his arm. And they were telling us that was to be expected. That usually the arm is one of the last things that even starts to show signs of movement at all.
And my vision was affected as well.
Yeah.
I cannot drive since my stroke, and I cannot see to the right. My vision improved, but still have a field of vision impairments. So
yeah,
I can now speak, write, and understand much better.
And when you got back from Atlanta, what was the transition to outpatient, and how did you feel the level of care? Did it continue at the point where you were at Shepherd's, and when you went to outpatient, what was that like?
Well, fortunately for us, Shepherd's had a 2-step program. I mean, the initial was 6 to 8 weeks inpatient. Once we got out of that, they basically had accepted him to come down for what they call an outpatient. I mean, we weren't at our home; we were staying on site there, but we were getting up every day and driving off to their actual outpatient facility that they had there in Atlanta. So that was a pretty seamless transition initially, because the same kind of story. You got assigned an OT and a PT and speech pathologist, and he had a music therapist. So he was there all day long. I would take him there first thing in the morning, drop him off, leave him there, go back, have lunch with them, and kind of hang out a little bit till the afternoon until he got released. So that went on for 8 weeks. So we came back. We finally got back to Cary for good right before Thanksgiving that year after he had a stroke in July.
Were you working from Atlanta while you were down there, Chris, as much as possible?
I was working sparingly. My wife had an incredible job at SAS, and so that was who our health insurance was through and everything. So I had to scale back what I was doing. Now, when you become a caregiver, and that was one of the requirements for Shepherd Center anyway, is that one of us had to volunteer to be the trained caregiver.
Yeah.
In case, because initially when you get there, you don't know what kind of things they're going to recover, what they're not going to be able to do.
Right.
I volunteered myself to do that, so I had to kind of step back a little bit from my career. I had some really great clients that stuck with me, and I actually did work from time to time when I was down there. But I'll be honest, it was hard to focus.
Oh, of course it was.
And even once we got back here, every day we were going to therapy. I mean, immediately as soon as we got back, we had found a rehab outpatient facility here. It was right here in Cary, about 3 miles away from us. They had an incredible SLP, Mara Silverman, who actually was a specialist in aphasia.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That was incredible. And she was working at this rehab facility that's what they focused on, was stroke recovery, steps to recovery. And it was a husband and wife team, and she was the PT, and they had some great OTs. And so we went there every week, 3 times a week for about 3 hours a day. So, I mean, we pretty much, we weren't doing it every day, but almost. So it was a pretty seamless thing.
And how long did your insurance continue to support the treatment?
I will have to say that they were fantastic. They stuck with us the entire time.
That's amazing.
My wife had to go to bed a few times, but for the most part, and I think a lot of it had to do obviously with his age.
Sure.
And he was still on our insurance and was going to be able to be up through age 26.
Yep.
So that was a huge thing because he needed a lot of therapy. It was going to take a lot of work. And even our SLP, Mara, she got us onto the idea of getting a team of ladies to work with them. They didn't have to be speech therapists.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them actually had been. A couple were teachers or just stay-at-home moms, or had homeschooled their kids or whatever. But once we got into a really good pattern of speech therapy processes, they were coming in and meeting with them, multiple times during the week. And so he was getting that much more therapy than what a typical person does with just going to a truly trained SLP. Because she said, we just need him talking, reading, writing, doing all the modalities to try to recover as much as he can.
Chris and Austin, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. One thing you mentioned, Chris, that was really important to me is that you received caregiver training.
Yes.
And we've talked about this offline several times, and how, when you do transition into outpatient, the amount of time you're spending with a therapist flips to now you're spending that time with a caregiver in a similar role. And unless there's training, you didn't go to school for this. You don't do this every day. So you're learning.
Right.
I want to extend on that because I want to shift the conversation a little bit to, you were a competitive athlete, Austin's a competitive athlete. You kind of had this mentality, both of you, right?
Yeah.
Then Austin decides, I want to go to school, right? So you decide to enroll in Liberty. One of the things that resonated in me when Austin gave his talk was the fact that he had to read all these textbooks out loud.
That became a huge component of his speech therapy. And, the big thing about rehab, it has to be meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
You just can't be going there and doing reps. It's not about just doing reps. It's got to be meaningful reps. And so we started, his initial class, it was all done online. Mm-hmm. But, we thought, we'll just give it a try. We'll take it for audit and see how he does. Mm-hmm. Initially we had started that summer, I guess, before he was supposed to, this was like a year past when he was supposed to actually have gone to Liberty to physically be there before he had his stroke. But we had been reading the Magic Treehouse books out loud. He had sat down with his sister, and they did that all through the summer. And it's just like, he'd gotten very good at reading. We felt like his ability to understand what he was reading was pretty good. So it's like, let's take a class. We found an earth science class. And so we started that with Liberty. And he started doing so well with it that we were like, I wonder if they'll let us take it for credit. And unfortunately, they wouldn't because we were too far into it. So we actually had to take the entire class all over again, mm-hmm. and we went through it all over again. But the reading out loud was a huge thing for him, in helping his ability, because he had apraxia in addition to having aphasia. Apraxia is your brain communicating with your tongue, the sounds to make to form words and syllables, and so yeah.
So you got an associate's degree from Liberty. How long did that take?
About 7 years ago.
It took 7 years. 7 years. We started in 2015.
7 years.
Yeah, because it was one class at a time, and we had to take. They package everything in 8 weeks. Well, taking a class in 8 weeks for somebody with aphasia, even I don't think I could do a whole college class in 8 weeks.
No.
We would take it for audit, and he would do the majority of the reading of the text, and they would have online discussion boards that they had to answer questions and stuff. And so for him to have to sit down and write and articulate ideas out for things like that almost took in a semester in and of itself. So we would do the first half of the semester was reading all the course content, and then the second half was basically spent doing all their written requirements for the class. And so that would take 2 semesters for him. It turned into 16 weeks basically. So yeah, it was slow, but we got to the point eventually where he was almost doing 2 classes, at a time. Well, it was a lot of work, and because we were still doing, PT and OT too. I mean, he wasn't just doing the class work,
Yeah.
and I was trying all these kind of crazy devices, trying to help his arm get better and improve. I had been his coach when he was little, so it's just like, come on, Austin, we got to do this, we got to do this, we got to try this, and he was a willing participant. He was all vested, he was all in, like a true athlete. I want to get better, I want to get recover as much as I can. And so that's what we did, and we did it and did it and did it for a good three years. He was working on PT and OT, with me at home. After he'd been doing 3 years of that with the outpatient folks that we've been working with at Steps to Recovery. So I mean, we kept it up for about 6 solid years of just working.
You mentioned that it's good to have a purpose to the therapy, right? So you're not just doing the reps. So school became one of the purposes, right? Especially for the speech, et cetera. Physically, how you or Austin can answer this. I know your right arm still has a bit of an issue, but otherwise physically, how do you feel?
I feel much better. I use my right hand.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Why don't you tell them the things you can do now, though? You can do a lot of things with that arm that you weren't able to do.
I can now open and close doors, carrying my laundry basket downstairs and upstairs.
Which moms appreciates.
I was going to say, I bet mom appreciates that.
And wash the dishes.
Yep. Washes the dishes. Mow the lawn. You've shoveled 16 cubic yards of mulch into a wheelbarrow, and he would wheelbarrow it around for me while I was spreading it. Oh yeah, no, we went after everything we could. I mean, he shoveled snow on the driveway. He's been able to ride a bike again, and that's all having to involve using his right arm.
Yeah, sure, they all do. Mm-hmm.
He's come quite a long way with that.
The tires lift.
Oh yeah, what he's talking about with he was working with a trainer. We had a personal trainer that was working with him at O2 Fitness, and he had those big tractor trailer truck tires.
He was flipping tires?
He was picking it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was able to get down, and they had a hand hose that they were able to let him get a hold of. But he picked up an entire tractor trailer truck tire and stand up with it, and almost the whole place to start going into applauding what he was accomplishing. So because they kind of knew the story of what was going on there.
Austin, I know a lot of people that have functional use of both hands. They can't pick up a truck tire. That's great. When you guys sit back and we're coming up on Thanksgiving, and several years ago, that's when you guys came home from Atlanta after inpatient, outpatient. So Thanksgiving's probably a pretty meaningful holiday for you all, I'm sure.
Yeah.
What's next on the horizon? What's the next big hill you want to climb?
What do you want to accomplish next, Austin?
In the future, I still work on my language, conversations, and understanding. I continue to work on regaining language skills. Now I am working at a coffee shop as a cashier.
Very good. What's the name of the coffee shop for everybody?
Esteemed Coffee.
Esteemed Coffee. Is this the one in Cary?
Yeah, that's on Academy Street in downtown Cary. And actually, the two people that started it was one of his SLPs that was working with him, and another really good family friend, and who she also has a disability. She lost her vision when she was at UNC.
Okay.
And so she had a real heart to think about starting a business where they could employ people with disabilities. And obviously, Austin's story was a big motivation for them as well. And so they got this shop up and running. They have like 18 employees of various disabilities, Down syndrome, autism, TBIs like Austin, wide range. Yeah, it's been incredible to see the change in their lives, to actually have the opportunity to have meaningful employment.
Sure.
And that for a lot of folks who have disabilities from stroke, don't get to have.
Well, and I like coffee, so I'm going to make a point to have my next coffee meeting at Esteemed Coffee in Cary. That's wonderful.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Chris, I'll close with you. Any last things you could share with caregivers who are about to venture on this journey, right? And if you could give 3 things that would help them accelerate their learning or potentially give them some hope, what would they be?
Right. Well, I guess the first thing I'll say is, I'm sorry you've gotten put into this position, but it's something that, as in our case, as being a parent, I had to step up to the plate. Mm-hmm. The ICU nurse at Duke that we had was fantastic after Austin's initial surgery. he set my wife and I down. He says, you two have got to take care of yourself, because he realized that we were going to try to stay with him every moment of every day. And he just encouraged us to, let us do our job. He's in good care, and you take care of yourself. Because he said, this is going to be a marathon of a lifetime. This is not something that's going to be over in a couple of days, a couple of weeks, even a couple of months. I mean, it's going to continue on for a lifetime potentially. You just don't know initially, obviously, at the beginning of that.
Right.
And so taking good care of yourself, taking time for yourself is very important. The other thing is just trying to identify with your loved one what they're going through, and understanding what they lost, what that means to them, and trying to keep their motivation and their morale up. And then, just celebrating anything and everything that's an improvement, no matter how small it may seem to you or to others around you, to celebrate it, because they're going to build on each other. And there's going to be days when things don't seem like they're going forward. And then you're going to see days where it really improves dramatically. And so you just have to kind of celebrate those moments as they come along.
You said something right when I asked the question, which is, I'm sorry you're in this position, right? With just a lot of empathy, Chris. And I appreciate the fact that I think that's a great place to start, right?
Yeah.
And then taking care of yourself. Absolutely. It's difficult when you're in that caregiver role now.
Right.
You tend to kind of put yourself in the back seat. My wife is wired to be a caregiver. She took care of 2 ailing parents and a brother with ALS for almost 10 years.
Goodness.
And she would come home, and I could see after there'd be periods of time where she just needed some sort of a break.
Right.
And then a really good point to recognize, Austin, what you went through, right? How your life, you're playing soccer one day and then you're not. And to recognize that's different than a cancer diagnosis that happens over time, right? What I've learned about stroke is it's so sudden that your memory of normal life is very different than other people might reconcile. So I think it's a great way to make sure people understand what Austin and his peers are going through and how they perceive things, and then to celebrate those wins, right? You're Austin, you're the first stroke warrior I've talked to that spent the next 7 years going to college. So I think that is just an inspiration. I think it's such a purposeful recovery and therapy that I wonder if it's not something others should consider. Every stroke is different, right? But having that goal, and I have to say, Austin, your ability to speak is excellent.
Yeah.
You're very clear and very easily understood. It's like I would listen to you read a textbook.
You ought to hear him sing. He sang the national anthem at a Durham Bulls game.
Oh, you sing too? Come on.
Past Father's Day, he sang the national anthem all by himself before a crowd of about 4,000 or 5,000 people, and it was incredible.
Have you guys been up to Liberty for a game?
We never made it up there for a soccer game. Yeah, we probably need to do that. They came to town once to, I think, play NC State, but it didn't work out for us to be able to go see that game.
Would you be open if I could arrange a trip to Liberty to meet the coaching staff and go behind the scenes and see the field and everything? If you'd be open to that. I happen to know the coaching staff there and the coaching staff at State.
Yeah, I had actually reached out to Jeff Otter, I guess, who had been the previous coach. He was actually the coach that had reviewed Austin when he was trying out for the team. And so, he got to see the facilities and everything. But, we haven't met the current.
Oh, you did get to see the facilities there are.
Yeah, they're stellar. Yeah, Austin got to graduate, walk across the stage there on the field, on the football field. So, yeah, we've seen how much that school has changed even since he had committed to go there. So
good for you. Yeah, it's quite a facility, and I'm very happy for you and proud of you, Austin, that you got your degree there and feel part of that community. Wonderful. That's just great.
Yeah,
great. Thank you both for your time. When we started this program, I think this is the very type of story we had in mind.
Yeah.
When you think of No Plateau, which is Henry's theme here, Austin, I think you define it. Right. There is I see you doing great things, and, whether it's helping in a restaurant, serving coffee or, continuing to educate yourself and spreading mulch for your dad and doing laundry for your mom. Come on. That's awesome.
I think he had something else he wanted to say. What did you want to say, Austin?
Please do.
You must decide to believe you can reach your goals and never give up.
I think that's the key. You had to figure that out for yourself, right? Mm-hmm. That you wanted to hit those goals and believe in yourself. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you guys. I believe this is your first podcast. You're professionals. You did a great job.
Well, appreciate that.
All right. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate everybody tuning into this episode of the No Plateau Podcast. We'll put some maybe some information to follow Austin's journey in some of the show notes, and stay tuned. And thanks again, guys.
All right, you're welcome.
God bless.
God bless you too.
Thank you for tuning in to the No Plateau Podcast. Please make sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date on more stroke and brain injury recovery stories. The No Plateau Podcast is intended to give you an insight into stroke and brain injury survivors' journeys. Any opinions given on this podcast are strictly the individual's, and we do not suggest that you necessarily hold the same viewpoints as anyone on this podcast. This podcast is intended to supplement stroke and brain injury survivors' recovery journey. Therefore, all content affiliated with this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health providers with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Reliance on any information provided by the No Plateau Podcast is solely at your own risk.